Alright, what's up everybody? Uh, welcome, welcome to this stream. Today we are reviewing my challenge run from, uh, Sunday. It was a great day. I probably should have actually pulled up the list first, my bad. Let me see what I can do about that. One second, folks. Okay, my list is a little bit different. Pretend that these are noxious revivals and you have the list essentially. These are new things I'm going to be trying out later. Yo, what up, High Star? Thanks for tuning in. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the list, and why I made choices that I did. So, Newton had recently done a 5-0 with, Cabal Pit in the land base, and I am playing Caracas instead of Cabal Pit because I think Caracas is pretty relevant still these days. I like it a lot more than Cabal Pit. Um, and other than that, I don't know. The list is honestly pretty similar to what Newton's got. I had the Shriek Maw over the third Snuff Out. Um, and that wasn't my first choice, honestly. I'd rather would have had the third Snuff Out, but I actually didn't have the tickets to pick them up, so I just kind of went for it, um, and just played the Shriek Maw anyway. So, it all worked out, I guess, but anyway, let's get into some matches. So this is round one, game one. Hey, Scranton, thanks for tuning in. Good to see you, pal. Um, okay, so let's talk about round one, game one, against Blue Red Delver. We keep a hand that's honestly just all around good. Once upon a time to thin things out, and we find Cradle off the once, or fetch first to thin things out, and then once upon a time to find the Cradle. Find out that we're up against the big bad. Draw a hoof, sadly, but we'll just deploy a Wirewood and a fetch land and pass here. We didn't turn to Grist because we didn't want to play directly into Daze, so we took our time there. Dragon's Rage Channeler comes down, followed by a Ponder, likely to set up, but they actually ended up shuffling off the Ponder, which I thought was interesting. Delver comes in, just let it happen. Let's go get a Bayou and get ready to try to cast this Grist. We can do it off Boseiju without exposing Cradle and still playing around Daze. It resolves, so we end up ticking up and sending back. So Ponder off the Dragon's Rage Channeler. Or Ponder, Dragon's Rage Channeler, trigger. Gonna expand their graveyard a little bit just so we can keep up. Bolt comes down against the Grist and turns on Delirium for the DRC so the DRC can finish off the Grist. It's not great, but what I've learned with this grist is that they seem to be light on counter magic. So, and I can still use this natural order as kind of a bait spell because I'm more interested in resolving the hoof in the end game. Also make sure to do this when you do cast natural order. Leave it on the stack for a little bit, because just because you have the hoof in hand doesn't mean you might be able to not get the concession out of them just with the natural order on the stack. They let it resolve, and we grab endurance, um, and just kind of set them back. And then we decide to offer some trades here just because the Delver is going to be the next best threat. They end up taking the trade and brainstorm with Dragon's Rage Channeler. Find the Delirium, and they send it back. We find the crop rotation. So at this point, I'm priced into one of two things. One, I can bog, or two, I can just grab another cradle and get in there with the hoof. I decide to gamble and just grab cradle, and I win the gamble and win the game. So we go into game two versus Blue Red Delver. Um, see what kind of hands we look at. I like this hand a lot because it has the three fetches to just turn on Reclaimer. It's got removal and it's got Fiend Artisan, so pretty good ingredients to get there. See a turn one Delver here, and we actually now get to Zenith on turn one, I think. Kind of again saving the Reclaimer for when it's a 3/4 if possible. Lightning Bolt comes off the reveal, and we decide to snuff out in response and upkeep. After getting the information, Dryad Arbor gets bolted. I get wasted, but it's okay because we have a Reclaimer to follow up. It's a 3/4, and it sticks. DRC comes down, followed by a Ponder. Darcy trigger, they decide to leave on top, so probably something pretty good. Um, at this point, we're just holding up Bog option. Bog's looking especially better now. So we kind of just go for it. Reclaimer meets Unholy Heat in response, but hey, that's okay. We got the DRCs handled. We play out Fiend Artisan here, and then just waste them to turn off future Mystic Sanctuaries and kind of try to set them back. This isn't ideal for us because multiple DRCs is really hard to face down in our deck, I think. Uh, so it's a little bit of a nightmare, but not as much of a nightmare as Fiend Artisan, right? So I think, yeah, at this point we want to play Grist in case they have days, because Green Sun Zenith is a much more valuable spell. Fiend Artisan grows to be a 4/4, and we go ahead and enter ourselves into the race. Expressive Iteration goes off, finds them a bauble, so both the DRCs are going to be turned on, which means Grist is going to meet his ultimate demise. Yo, Ethan, what up, dog? Welcome. Um, so yeah, at this point, oh, we draw a second Grist too, which is just pretty cool. However, we don't want to use the stack in case they have Force of Will, so we're just going to sack the Insect token and go get Endurance, manage the art again, and send it back. And we have big monsters and they have small monsters. I throw a green sun out to get a shepherd so I can make sure this grist gets resolved. Um, Shepherd eats bolt in response. And grist meets force of will. But that's okay, because we're going to send in a 7/7 and pass. Um, I think I'm palming the stuff out in case of a Murktide Regent, which is the case here. Throw out the Reclaimer, see if it gets countered. It doesn't, so throw the snuff out there. 7 at our boy, 7 at our opponent. Pass it back, and that's the concession, ending round 1 versus Blue Red Delver. So now we move on to round 2. Round 2 was pretty short, all things considered. I think my opponent was on Cephaloid Breakfast. I'll let you be the judge. Anyway, I had to mull that first hand because it didn't have any lands and only a Once Upon a Time, and that reads to me as a one-lander, and that reads to me as a bad time. So we said, nah, pass it off. Throw Dryad Arbor back on bottom here, and we're good to go. Once Upon a Time found us a Cradle. We send it back, and they start out with an Island Aether Vial. And then this turn is the turn that I just spew everything, because it doesn't look like they're going to be able to do a lot about it. They take a brainstorm, they crack a fetch, and they therapy me, naming natural order, and I activate the shepherd and swing for lethal, and that's it. Very quick, very lights out game 1. But I think I knew it was Ceph Breakfast going in because it was Esper, and some Ceph Breakfast decks play Vile, so it seemed like a good assumption and where we should go from there. So into game 2. All right. Game 2. Keep a pretty solid hand, has a solid plan. The snuff out's not turned on yet, but that's not really a big deal. We'll probably find a land to turn it on if we need it to be relevant. Llanowar Elves is a great draw. They therapy me, naming Green Sun Zenith and Miss. I just play out my Reclaimers so I don't get hit on flashbacks, and then I play out the Artisan and the Mystic and pass back. Artisan meets Plow, and they get the Thassa's Oracle down to flashback therapy to take the natural order. We decide to swing for a bit, and the plan is basically to get these reclaimers turned on in the span of one turn by activating them both at the end of my turn, and then making sure that I grab a fetch at the end of the chain so I can crack off for third land. So we'll see that demonstrated here. We'll just grab a fetch, into another fetch, untap, upkeep fetch, grab a swamp, draw. We fire off this Thoughtseize, and that gets the concession. So again, really quite an uneventful round 2. Not not really sure, but I was correct in assuming that they had the Thassa's Oracle, or that they were Cephaloid Breakfast, because they showed us Thassa's Oracle. So, okay, round 3. This was against Mono Black, Leyline, Stompy deck. Not my favorite thing to see in the world, but it worked out this time. We had to mulligan because we didn't have green source. And we kept the 6, and we threw back one of the reclaimers because it was repetitive. They play a ley line, and I feel better about putting back the Reclaimer after that kind of. Um, and we end up green sunning for 0 because I think a turn 2 Grist would be pretty good. They Thoughtseize, taking Reclaimer, which I thought was really interesting. I thought that was a very strange line. Um, and I lay down the Grist and just kind of make an insect and pass it back. They Thoughtseize out my Crater Hoof. Visionary into another land, play a fetch, draw attack, send it back. At this point, I'm a little worried about Helm. Um, draw the Shepherd, tick up, put him to 9 and pass. And we're coming up to Colossal Error number 1 of the event. My intention here was to float the Boseiju mana before playing the new Boseiju and then activating and winning. However, my brain jumped the gun and I tapped and put the Boseiju into play without floating the mana and didn't have enough mana to activate. And so I kind of just had to swing and pray. We put them to 2. If they draw a Helm and have a 5th source, we're dead. If they don't, we win. And we won the bet. So, again, that could have been entirely avoided had I just floated the Boseiju mana so I could get the Dino Bash activation. But, we got lucky instead. So, I guess it works out. Talk about bonehead errors. Let's go to game 2 of this matchup, which I found very entertaining as it was happening. So I looked at the 7 and decided it was keepable because the Once Upon a Time would more than likely find me a green source. They mulled 6. Swamp fires off Thoughtseize, and we have to cast Once Upon a Time in response. We do not find the initial or like the fast green source. So what we end up taking here is Cradle. And they Thoughtseize us, and they take a Shepherd and pass, and we always had it. We never didn't have it. We always had it. Don't even worry about Anyway, Bayou lets us play out Symbiote, and they pass, or I pass, and they Dark Ritual into Shieldred. And I thought that was interesting because they definitely saw the Karakas in my hand. But I guess we're just going to go ahead and show them again. Swing for 1. So, instance number 1 of Karakas being great in this event. Now they tap out for Leyline. Um, and we just kind of get to start drawing some cards here. The Force of Vigor is going to protect us in the event that they have the Helm. We do a little bouncy, a little play again, redraw, send in. They have 2 cards in hand. Yo, thanks, Def Not Oz. I don't know. I think part of it is insane luck, but yeah, it's been awesome crushing it lately. Send back. They draw their 3rd card. They play a land, and I think this would have like to me was Helm, when they tapped that, but they decided, Shieldred getting bounced once wasn't enough. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Why not? Here, let me bounce in an upkeep so I don't take the trigger from drawing my card. Thank you. Alright, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and just play out a few things here. Yada yada, draw some cards, bounce my guy, play my guy, find the Green Sun Zenith, crop rotate out, the Cradle, get another Cradle, And then Green Sun for 8, and swing for lethal. Yeah, I know. I've been taking quite a break from streaming, and kind of just getting into improving my game again. And I recently have addressed some personal health issues, and now I'm getting back into the content creation field. I have like a little storytelling series I've been starting on YouTube, and I decided I want to turn back on my stream again and just start streaming games and replays and things like that. So I'm getting back into it. Slowly but surely, you'll be seeing more of me on Twitch and YouTube. So thanks again for following, everyone. It means a lot to me, especially those longtime fans who are out there. Really appreciate you guys. So, um, okay. And yeah, that's the end of round 3. So we're 3-0 at this point. Again, we're on like 2 hours of sleep during the event, and just kind of mystified by the whole thing. But we end up getting the round 4 pairing into Bug Hogak. Yeah, I definitely will. I definitely will be enjoying the content creation life, I think. So, we keep a hand with a bunch of mana donks, green sensing the crop rotation, plenty of options. In the blind, send it back, and we see the Stitcher supplier, and I don't know. I kind of breathe a sigh of relief at this point. I really like this matchup, and I haven't seen this deck in a while, so. All right, where was I? So Stitcher supplier turn 1, and they send back. We just spend this turn developing some stuff. Hold up for a fetch and pass. They spend turn 2 playing Alter. So at this point, Zenith is going to be used to go grab Collector Rufy just to make sure that we don't get comboed on. And we just bog out their graveyard just to keep them off any Hogaks that might be in hand. They grave crawl and pass back. We crop rotate out for a cradle, just hoping for a good top deck. And we get a Fiend Artisan, so we have it on the next turn. Just need to hold out basically one turn, which looks completely doable because the altar is off. They don't really have a way to combo, so they just hardcast a Vengevine and send it back. We draw Zenith anyway, so we just Green Sun for 8 and get the hoof and swing for lethal. Yeah, this is a deck that was popular a couple years ago in like 2020. It's a pretty. It plays like Hedron Crab, Careful Study, Stitcher Supplier, Gravecrawler, Vengevine, Carrion Feeder, Putrid Imp, like Hogak, Bridge from Below. It can what it can do is it can mill itself out, creating a bunch of zombies in the process and recasting Hogak over and over, and then sacking all that power and milling you out and winning the game that way. So that's how it's a combo deck, but it also is a fairly decent graveyard aggro deck as well if it doesn't have a bunch of creatures in front of it. So, um, game 2. All right, game 2 versus the GAC. What did we do to him this time? This is a hand that we kept. It's a little land heavy, but endurance is there for emergencies and all that jazz. We end up just casting out Llanowar and passing. They Thoughtseize out our endurance and they mill themselves for a bit, find a Hogak, among other things. We grab Reclaimer and then Green Sun for 2. I think this is for Fiend Artisan. No, I mean, oh yeah, it's for Collector of Features so we don't get altered to death. Like, they can cast Hogak at this point, that's fine. But at least we're not gonna get comboed. Uh, I think we needed to, or I don't remember. Yeah, we fetch out and we're just going for the natural order line here. Take out their bridge from below in the process. Crater Hoof, swing, -2, and that's game. So 4-0, and riding our high, basically into round 5, where we get the unfortunate pairing of our buddy Matthew, punishing waterfalls. Um, he is running Jund Fiend Artisan, so it's kind of a team kill. Hate to see it, but we keep this hand and see what we can do in this game 1. They start out with Once Upon a Time, find a Windswept Heath, and send it back. We start with our Once Upon a Time, find a fetch land, play a Llanowar Elves. They fetch for a Dryad Arbor. We send back. They play out Fiend Artisan. And at this point, what's going through my head is that Cradle is going to be the most broken thing they can do. So we just need to Beseiju it out and let them have another land. They end up attacking, so it kind of worked out in my favor. They Beseiju my Cradle back because they know the value of Cradle. We throw down a Symbiote and a couple Reclaimers and swing in, and at this point, I think we know that Opposition Agent is likely coming out of our opponent's deck. Yep, there it is. Probably the strongest thing to do against us. So we have to go on an aggro plan and just see what we can do with it. This is where things get real messy. So they send back, and we're like, okay, we got a bunch of power, but they flash in an endurance, take out our graveyard, and make favorable blocks. And I only put them to 8 and kind of have a small board after. I have some 4/4 Fiend Artisans, but they end up cycling out and getting another endurance to shrink them. And now they have the more powerful board. Uh, they get a Ramanop Excavator, and that's basically lights because once they untap, they get to go get a Crater Hoof off Fiend Artisan, and there's nothing we can do about it. But they actually end up hard casting the hoof, so that's the end of game 1. All right, so on to game 2. Um, let's see what kind of hand we kept. Oh yeah, we kept a hand that is kind of interesting. It has a lot of interaction and can buy a lot of tempo. We Thoughtseize here, and we have the Snuff out for the Ignoble. The Grist is going to be a little later. The Opposition Agent is the scariest thing in the matchup, so we have to take Oppo. Um, they play the Ignoble, and we snuff it out. We play out a Visionary here and pass it back. And things are looking okay now because Reclaimer can find us Cradle. They end up fetching and playing out of Bayou and then passing. They snuffed out my Allosaurus Shepherd. I played out the Reclaimer and played out the Dryad Arbor. They play Grist and +1 for the insect. We draw Cradle. It's not quite enough yet, so we just kind of have to bide our time. Yeah, they go for the Reclaimer. We get a Cradle out of the deal just to make sure we can do the double Cradle thing. And that's lethal. So now we go to game 3. All right. And we keep a pretty decent hand. Like, we got interaction, we got good stuff going on. They Thoughtseize, and they take our Thoughtseize. So we just start out with a good ol' Green Sun for 0 to get tempo positive. They snuff out the Dryad Arbor going to 14, which puts 2 lands in yard. And this is where it gets interesting, right? So I could play Fiend Artisan on turn 2 in the hopes of going to find Oppo Agent at some point. But with the third Reclaimer drawn and 2 lands in the yard, I think it's time to just go on Reclaimer aggro. My opponent plays a Magus of the Moon, which does not affect me in any way, shape, or form at this point. I send in, put him to 6, play another Reclaimer out, and pass it back. We send in with all of them, see some blocks happen. This Reclaimer goes to get a Dryad Arbor, Magus dies, and I get to Thoughtseize out the natural order in their hand and play out a Fiend Artisan. Swing for lethal. They fetch Dryad Arbor to try to get enough blockers to block all the bodies. And I end up Besageing the Dryad Arbor before blockers so I can get the win in. So at this point, we are 5-0. And we head into round 6, where we get paired into Painter. Painter, Painter, Painter. What a time to be alive. Alright, that hand had no green sources. This hand has no green sources. We go to 5. And keep a pretty decent 5. So, mount into Welder, into Pedal, and Pass. We start out with a Once Upon a Time, find a Reclaimer, and throw out a Mystic. They end up casting an Aethersworn Canonist. This would have mattered a lot more if I was on Glimpse Elves, but I don't think it matters as much here. Throw down a Fiend Artisan or Wooded Foothills, pass. Send it back after doing essentially nothing. We don't have black mana for the opposition agent, but that's okay. We're just going to go get a Grist and kill the Welder. They play a Goblin Engineer, so it's a good thing we got rid of the Welder. Painter Servants in the yard. Grist is going to die to the Canonist. That's okay. We ripped the oof that I think we were going to search for, but now we're searching for Endurance to just empty the yard and, again, have a pretty large an in charge board here. Yeah, they don't do anything. We play a collector Oofy. We cycle out for a land. We swing for 7, send it back. They play a Critter Maker, get rid of the Oofy. We swing for a lot. They go to 5, and they concede. Yeah, sorry. I totally was speeding through the sideboarding options here. So there's not really a way to have the list pulled up, but basically for this matchup, oh boy, I sided in endurances, force of vigors, um, and snuff outs, and I took out Allosaurus shepherds and a mixture of symbiotes and visionaries. I think I boarded in the extra grist as well, and I took out the Caracas. Uh, and that was basically the board for the painter matchup. So we head into game 2, and game 2 is going to be home to Colossal Error number 2 of this tournament. Let's see if we can catch it. So we keep this hand. Uh, they start out with Saga. We draw Progenitus, which just sucks. That's just not where we want it to be. Really, ever. They put a painter on blue, and we draw the Force of Vigor. So here's where things get bad. Um, So I should have done anything in upkeep first, but I thought I had a little bit more time. In upkeep I should have Force of Vigored the Saga and the Servant, but they were able to float the blue here, or float a colorless here. I Force of Vigor the SSG into a Spirit guy into a Blast. I let the Saga go, and they were able to play a red source before activating the grindstone, and I snuffed out in response, and they blasted. So there were a few things I could have done differently, right? Like I could have force of vigored in upkeep, um, saw the blast go off, and then paint and then snuff out in response. I guess to that, I could have snuffed out in response to the saga trigger. Going to search, there were definitely um, some mistakes made here. So that ended up losing me the game. Um, and we have to go to game 3. That said, game 3. Oh shit. There we go. Okay. So we had to ship that because I had Progenitus in hand. And we end up keeping this, hoping that Once Upon a Time can find us some earlier action. Doesn't really end up doing that. But we have endurances, I guess, so things are probably going to be fine. Anyway, they start out with a grindstone and a pedal. We draw another land that isn't Beseiju, thank God, so we can hold on to the Beseiju. We play out the Fiend Artisan and pass. They play a Foothills and pass, and we swing in for 1. They bolt here. I could have flashed an endurance in response there, but I was kind of worried about holding on to it for an actual purpose. Nothing came up, of course, but we play out a Mystic and we pass it back. They play an engineer here and pick up a painter's servant. And a turn we flash an endurance and clean up the yard. Swing in for 3. They find a canonist. We flash in another endurance end of turn to add to the beat squad. Swing for 6. They take 3. They go down to 9 here, activating Grindstone. They do find the servant. So this is where things get really interesting. They end up playing another Grindstone and an LED. Uh, so at this point, they go down to 7, and they activate their Grindstone and also activate Engineer to swap in Painter's Servant. So in response, I throw out a Beseiju at the Servant because I want them to crack LED and do it again. Which is exactly what happens. They end up cracking the LED, and they hit Grindstone activation again while Painter's on the table. Now, it looks like I should be dead, but chat, can you tell me why I'm not dead? Because this Grindstone activation is going to put every single card in my deck in my graveyard. And there, and after that, the Painter Servant is going to be gone due to Beseiju, and then this Grindstone's going to hit after that. But why am I alive here? Why am I alive? Under the stack is a Beseiju that's targeting this Painter's Servant. So they put a Grindstone activation. We Beseiju the Painter's Servant. They Grindstone again. But there is something that's going to happen. Oh, sorry. I have 2 Endurances, an Elvish Mystic, and a Dryad Arbor in play at this time. All right. Well, I'll tell you. So the Grindstone activation goes off and puts every card in my graveyard, and there's a certain trigger that happens. Progenitus goes back into the deck. The Beseiju resolves, taking out the Painter's Servant. They get a land. The other Grindstone trigger resolves, puts Progenitus in the yard, and then back into the deck. They're tapped out, and we have 8 power on board. We go to our last draw step, draw Progenitus, and win the game. Yeah, I forgot Projan after board. We did draw him in game 2, so I should have remembered that. But yeah, Progenitus, we used it as a time walk essentially, and it bought us the game and the match and the 6-0. On to round 7 against the dreaded Blue-Red Delver. All right, so it's nice to have an inconsequential round. Oh no, I went. There it is. Okay. So, they end up starting with a volcanic island into a dragon's rage channeler. We fire off a once upon a time finding a duplicate shepherd and play the shepherd out. We don't mind if this one eats bolt, obviously, so it's all good. Bolt does happen. They mill a delver, which is pretty lucky, good for delirium. But they play a Mystic Sanctuary and send it back, so we play out a Shepherd and do a Reclaimer at this point. They play another DRC and follow up with a Wasteland on Cradle. We find our second land and we pass back They don't do anything except an expressive iteration post combat. Probably be. I mean, I don't really know. I guess they could have. They didn't want to swing. Anyway. So we crack out Caracas and grab Cradle. However, before I can get to my turn, Unholy Heat meets the Elvish Reclaimer. So it's a little unfortunate, but we do get a symbiote and we do get a Fiend Artisan out of the deal and send it back. They expressively iterate, wasting us again and sending us to 13 and playing Delver. We're a little screwed on mana at this point, so it's not looking good. The Channelers come in for 6 more damage, putting us to 7, and I think they follow up with a Murktide Regent here. Yep. Classic Delver stuff. Delver doing Delver things. And at this point, all we can do is get an Endurance to block the incoming Murktide Regent, but they end up deliriousing themselves and winning game 1 with lethal. So we end up going to game 2. Okay. Game 2. We keep a pretty solid hand. Start out with a Once Upon a Time, find an Endurance, just play out a Llanowar Elves and send it back. Hopefully jam a turn 2 Endurance, basically, but not going to get there. We end up playing Shepherd into a Wasteland and wasting out the Volcanic Island. Delver comes down. We've just played a land and pass. They brainstorm, put the expressive on top, get in for 3. Play a Mystic and pass. We have the Dryad Arbor, and then we just endurance their main phase while we have the Shepherd protected from any kind of removal. They rough tumble us and swing for 3. We draw another Shepherd, thankfully, and then we go get a Fiend Artisan off the Zenith. That's a 4/4. And now we're kind of in control of this board. Fetch out a Dryad Arbor and just go get. They submerge our Fiend Artisan, so we decide to go get a Fiend Artisan. And just reset, basically. They get rid of some stuff, but we have pretty big guys. And they scoop to the grist. So that is the end of game 2 in round 7. On to game 3. Uh, let's see here. So keep a really solid hand again. Just thankfully a good hand in general. And we start out with Reclaimer. They end up dazing into a Brainstorm. I don't mind playing into Daze when they don't start with a turn 1 threat, so that's why I played Reclaimer instead of Shepherd there. Anyway, here's a Visionary into another card. Feels good to be up a card like that. They play a tap Steam Vents and send back. Again, no threat, no problem. We end up just making sure that Symbiote can protect Shepherd, and then Endurance gets resolved. And then we send back Visionary during our turn so that we can protect Shepherd on their turn. I think we get a Reclaimer here off this Green Sun Zenith, if I remember correctly. Yep. Just a nice little 3/4 that can find us a Cradle at some point, no problem. They find a Murktide Regent, also not really an issue. We play out a Visionary and just put it back and pass. They expressive into a Bolt for the insect, but they can't swing with the Murktide. We search for Cradle, but they submerge our Reclaimer. And then we just kind of play out a Grist, sack a creature, get rid of the Murktide, play out our Fiend Artisan, swing for a lot, put our opponent 6, pass. They put a Rough Tumble on top, Rough Tumble me out, play another Murktide. Oh, they submerge first and then play another Murktide to get another counter. We draw the Fiend Artisan again, recast. It's a 6/6 at this point. It gets double bolted. They swing for 7 at Grist and pass. And we play Visionary, draw, play a Shepherd. They daze it for some reason. They go to 1, and we just kind of have the law of wide, and we win the game. So, yeah, that's the 7-0 that puts us into the top 8. And in the quarterfinals, we get a rematch versus the Bug Hogak player from round 4. I'm sure they were stoked to see me again. Um, yeah, I think the whiteboard has more glaring weaknesses than the snuff outs and thought seizes. I think the green black configuration is a lot better. So, all right. Knowing what our opponent's on, this endurance in hand is pretty nice to have. They careful study into double bridge and pass. We play out a couple of things. We actually get a redraw here. Plenty of hate, just chilling. They Stitcher Supplier, they get the blood gassed out, they therapy. We endurance in response because we know that's what they're going to name. We stack it so that the evoke trigger resolves first, so that the bridges get exiled rather than put back on bottom. And then the therapy resolves, and they actually therapied themselves for Vengevine. But that's okay. We have the bog, so just in case. Anyway, here's more visionaries into more symbiotes into more visionary. We bog them out and we just hold this green sun and say, I'm going to win the game next turn. That's the plan. They alter, which is a little scary because they get a lot of cards in yard off this. But it doesn't end up going anywhere, I don't think. They just play Gak and pass. And we Zenith for 8 and get our big guy and win game 1 of the quarterfinals. On to game 2. Alright, alright, alright. So, this hand is weird, but it works because it has so much interaction. It's a little slow. They end up skipping through their turn 1, so that's pretty convenient for us. They end up playing a Hedron Crab there. We top deck the Bayou and decide to play the Grist and kill the Crab before it can do anything. They decay the Grist, and we play out a few mana donks and pass turn. Hardcast Blood Gas, no big deal. Here's a Fendor and Elves, and we'll hold up a Hardcast Endurance. Supplier finds them some cards, and with those cards, they end up casting Hogak and Gravecrawler. We flash an Endurance regardless. And then we natural order for the Hoof and swing. And that puts them to 5. They swing back, hoping to use Stitcher Supplier to block. But we do draw Green Sun Zenith, which finds us second Grist. and they end up sniping the only blocker and swinging for exactly lethal off the single hoof, and that takes us into the semifinals of this event. Semifinals, we get paired against the new Enter the Dungeon Stompy. Da 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 da. Winning the die roll, very important here. So here we go. We play out a Shepherd and we give it an old pass. Planes go. So we play out a Symbiote into an Oofy into a 1. Damage. Send it back. And I think, yeah, here is the Archon of Emeria. We end up green sunning for Grist, sacking Symbiote, and then recast, and then playing a new Symbiote from our hand, and passing back. They play Seasoned Dungeoneer. We find a Shepherd. We activate for 5. Take the initiative. Send it back. They end up swinging with the Dungeoneer. I think it Grist. Yep. And play another Seasoned Dungeoneer, taking back the initiative, wastelanding our Cradle, and sending back. We have another one, so we just Dino Bash for the win. So that is the end of Game 1 versus Take the Initiative Stompy. Into Game 2. This will be the second time in top 8 where my opponent does not do anything on turn 1 and sends it back. Not really sure why, but that's where we are. So we get the turn 1 Once Upon a Time into a Reclaimer. We have a lot of hate, as you can see. Oh, actually, we just Zenith for 0. That's also fine. They Once Upon a Time into an Ancient Tomb, and we get the turn 2 Grist. I feel like Grist is pretty powerful in this matchup in general. And then, yeah, so we get to play out the Oofy. They had plowed our Reclaimer, sadly, but no biggie. Archon of Emeria is here to do nothing because it gets snuffed out. Then we flash an Endurance, and they end up scooping the game right there. Bang, bang, bam. We are into the finals of this challenge. So let's go ahead and see what's going on. You know what? I forgot to rename the stream entirely. But anyway, game 1, round 10. Our final opponent, JPA on Rug Dragon, as he so lovingly calls it. Um, and we keep kind of an interesting game 1 hand. I think I liked it as a 6. Like, I just kind of ignore the fact that Hoof's in my hand. So, ended up keeping that. Um, anyway, so yeah, we play out a Shepherd here into a Green Sun for 0 just to keep developing from the fact that we have 1 land hand. They play out a Darcy, we draw land, play out a Symbiote, and then play out a Fiend Artisan. Kind of have a nice board going on right now. They have the Murktide, though, which is pretty strong. I end up going to get a Grist here and Gristing out their Murktide. They end up having the Bolt for the Fiend Artisan. That's a 3/3 exactly. Then they have the Bolt for the Shepherd. They're able to 1, and now Grist is gone. It's kind of a nightmare situation because they follow up with Murktide, and we're starting to get outclassed. Wow. 0 cards left in hand. They forced our Fiend Artisan. Pretty brutal. They played this quite well, honestly. Like, that was an amazing use of resources. And it's definitely going to cost us everything. We try to bog off here the force that they're trying to get back, and go to 5, hoping to do something and end up doing nothing, and that's the end of game one. So it's a shaky moment for us. This is the finals. We're down a game. It's tough, but we're gonna play it out and see what we can do. Um, this hand is decent. Was there anything I think I could have done different in game one versus JPA? Could have done different. I mean, I think it was just there wasn't really anything to be done about the fact that they had the multiple bolts, the multiple Murktides, the force pitching the Murktide. Like, it just seemed like they had quite the hand for any kind of approach I could have taken. And I don't think that there was much to be done in that game one. Um, so, yeah, sadly, I just think we were outclassed there. The only core decision I think I could have made was maybe mulling that hand and seeing if a different hand could have done it. But it's yeah, it just would have had to been a much better 6 than the 7 that I ended up having. So um, all right. So ponder off this DRC. Do another ponder. Turn 2. It's delirious. We crop rotate into a bog. Make it a 1/1 instead, and now we're gonna resolve this grist. Again, multiple DRCs is pretty scary, but you know, we do what we can. They dazed this, I think, just for delirium's sake, obviously, because we had Shepard protecting it. But our board's looking pretty powerful. They end up ending the festivities and taking out my grist, which is big sad. But this endurance end up cleaning things up. We send in for 3 with the Reclaimer. They have a third DRC. Again, big scary times. I'm not trying to get Shriekmaw dazed here, and I want to hardcast it, so I end up like going in on Cradle, attacking for another 6, and just passing, and then they end up conceding. So we just kind of raced the Darcys before they could really start to do a lot more damage, and we got kind of lucky there. But yeah, multiple Darcy is usually really hard to come back out from under, and it's one of the worst situations that I think we could face as a deck. Um, in round 3 here, we keep a hand that's really aggressive. Uh, they start with the Darcy, and at this point, I'm like, F it. I don't want them to have the triggers. I'm just gonna snuff out now. Snuff out meets force of will, which is fine. It's a 2-for-1, works out for me. I had to play this Mystic. It gets dazed. I wasn't quite ready for that. I could have maybe played Shepherd there instead, but I also kind of like the idea of having Shepherd for later. So we just kind of took that gamble and lost on the fact that they had the daze. Um, but we untap, we play the Shepherd out, play a land and pass. They bolt the Shepherd. Bobble comes out. They swing for 1. They have 2 cards left in hand. They play a fetch. So I feel like their last card in hand is Murktide, so I evoke. the endurance and send their yard back. Um, and they end up cracking the bobble and passing. We end up casting Fiend Artisan or it sticks, which is amazing because it's a 4/4. They waste out my land and pass. I draw and play into a Visionary and attack for 4. They're brainstorming. We activate Fiend Artisan going to get an Endurance and clean up the yard. Um, Expressive Iteration buys them into a Brainstorm post-combat. We attack for 3 with Endurance. We play an Arbor and crack it out for another Endurance. Clean up their yard. Uh, Expressive Iteration comes down again. They pass. We draw Shriek Mob. We attack with everything. They end up going in on trying to trade out with the Fiend Artisan, which they do successfully by bolt blocking. Double Endurance still ready to go. And they bolt. They end the festivities. I untap with Endurance. And they concede the game. And it was just that concession was the most exciting moment of the whole day. Like I just got up and I was like, "Yes, I am the greatest!" Anyway, and I hugged and high-fived the couple of teammates that were there at the house with me or at the apartment with me. Um, and yeah, that's the story of how I 10-0'd this league. So yeah, I don't know. It was great. I plan on posting this VOD on YouTube so that uh, friends can see in case they missed the live event. Um, and I really appreciate all of you that did tune in for this. GG's all around. I'll be back to streaming more often, hopefully soon. I am working on releasing episode 2 of my storytelling series, Testacular, Spectacular, Vernacular, on my YouTube, so check that out if you haven't seen episode 1 yet. Episode 2 is already going to be leaps and bounds better, though, I can promise you that, so. Alright. So thanks everyone for tuning in for this challenge review, and I'll catch you soon. Have a good one.